always put the client experience at the forefront, you will make good decisions.
When chaos hits, you need to have a playbook. Hello and welcome. We are really excited to have you all. First off, you all are expecting this amazing human Becky Teal, and somehow you're looking at my mug. So yes, my name's Bryson Bird. I'm one of the cybersecurity advisors here at Huntress, and I'm filling in for Becky today. But more importantly, I am here with two amazing human beings that I'm very excited to be able to pick their brain throughout today and kind of talk about a topic that I think I speak for all three of us that's kind of near and dear to all of our hearts, which is, kind of the idea that like all of this tech, all of this latest feature set, all of these things that we see kind of flying by. There's a word that we've promised ourselves we're not going to use during this, so I'm trying not to. But all of this jargon that's flying by is not the most important thing. It's actually culture of organizations that drive some of the cyber resiliency. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over. I'll start with Teresa to introduce yourself. I'll kind of, we'll go Teresa, then Ernesto. And the question I think Becky always asks is like, how did you end up being an MSP? But, kind of talk about who you are, the company that you're with, but more importantly, like what got you into the space and security in general?
Okay, my name is Teresa Wacker. I'm with a company called SciTech. We are actually an MSSP. So I do not have any background in any of this, to be honest, but I just kind of fell into it close to 10 years ago. I was the client of a sister MSP, and this company was starting and they needed someone to kind of help them out with marketing and get things going. And now here I find myself as a panelist here for Huntress 10 years later. Very unexpected when you have a marketing degree, but thankfully this is where I'm at because I didn't learn anything about social media in school. So this is a benefit to me that didn't exist back in the day. So I love what I'm doing. I think that what's a little bit different about me is I still do have that marketing background. I don't have a technical background. So I come to you as not an engineer and not a computer science degree. I have a marketing degree and I just like people and I appreciate security, but I also appreciate being able to talk to people in a way that, is easier to understand. And I think that that's kind of why I sit where I am now.
100%. And Ernesto, let's talk about you. How did you kind of find your way into this space, but also introduce yourself to the audience?
My name is Ernesto Negron, and I found myself into this space by accident. Because when I was going to college back in the 80s, mid 80s, yes, I've been in technology for over 30 years. I was an accounting major. And back then I was actually a DJ, and there weren't any desktops at the time. They had, we didn't have desktops just yet, but you had the IBM mainframe computers and all that kind of stuff and the dumb terminals, and they had us write a program and said, hey, can you add music to it? And he says, yes. He gave me the IBM book, and that's when I started developing. And I was like, okay, so we created a program to do a kiosk and play music while you buy a car, and, add all the features. So that's when he said, you need to readmit and do computer science. And I say, why? It says, because this is the wave of the future. So I accepted the challenge. So I went, I graduated from Queens College. I started as a developer at Computer Associates first in New York. And then I went to the financial industry, and then I moved to Atlanta. But in Atlanta is where I actually came across MSP because I was always in the software development side companies, and then also the professional services. But one company sent me to London for a 1-month gig working at a data center. And then the guy says, hey, here's this product called Snort. Figure it out, see how we can use it for the data center. And ever since then, I got stuck with security. So I've been doing security for over 25 years. I've been in the MSP space for 25 years, and specifically in the legal vertical market.
And here we are. So as I'm sure those of you listening in, you're hearing this and you're hearing some incredible different backgrounds. That's the point, right? I think that all of us bring a different level of perspective from our own history, and I think it's all valuable. I could give my own, examples of that over time, but I think it's really valuable to have the folks that are technical, that aren't technical, that maybe are way more technical than they give themselves credit for. I've talked to you enough, Teresa. I know that to be true. So yeah, but with this particular conversation, I want to just kind of set the stage a little bit, right? So the title of it is around culture each strategy. But before we go any further, I want to just ground us in an understanding and making sure we're all kind of talking about the same thing. So Teresa, again, I'll start with you. What does that actually mean to you when we talk about culture, especially in the context of security culture of an organization? How do you define it for someone who's never thought about it that way?
I think that for me, culture is more about like the people. I think with security, we focus on the tools and the policies and all of those things, but that's just tools and policies. I think that the people are what create the culture and the environment. How do people respond and behave like when something happens? Like they're not just going to like read a policy and just they need to be able to use their brain. So to me, that's what the culture is. Culture is the people part of security, the human element.
Ernesto, what do you think about when you think about like culture within the context of security and security resilience?
I think I agree with Teresa with her comments. It does go by based on the people, right? It's a culture kind of, it's like a personally, but the way I look at it is the way of life. It's a way of life, right? It impacts all of us across the board. And that's one of the things we have as a driving factor when I do live security awareness training for clients. I drive it home to them. I bring it down to even the personal devices we have at our home. Those are entry points for bad actors. So, when you think of it that way and you realize this is a way of life, you teach your kids and everything else, it's always goes down to people, not so much as tools, because the tools are great, but the tools are not that factor that lets the bad actor in. It's the people. If you educate the people, then you minimize the potential exposure.
I couldn't agree more, and I want to stay on tools, and Ernesto, I'm gonna come over to you here. Um, you know, Kind of the question I have around the tool set and some of this is can you each kind of talk about maybe a time or a moment where you saw firsthand that those tools and the strategy around those tools weren't enough and that the real gap were those people, right? I worked in incident response for a little while, so I certainly understand some of those examples, but talk to me a little bit about that. I'll start with you this time, Ernesto.
I mean, a prime example is MFA, right? You got MFA bombing and all that kind of MFA fatigue. And I try to educate people. If you didn't initiate that login at 1 o'clock in the morning and you get that prompt and you still accept it, it's game over, right? Because it says you just allowed the bad actor into your account, and they have access to your system. And it's even though you have the tools, you have to educate them how those tools work so they understand when there is a moment that unsolicited, it should be an oh moment, and then they need to call the service desk or need to call someone to say, okay, I think my account is compromised. We need to do something. I mean, it goes back to educating the users because the tools are great, but the tools are only go so far without human interaction.
I agree, and Teresa, maybe an example you might have, but I'll repose the question, which is centered around, was there a specific moment or moments when you kind of had that example of where you saw firsthand that tools and strategy weren't enough, right? They're a part of it, but they're not necessarily enough comparatively to the culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's moments along the road that I've seen that. I mean, I don't know that I can go back to the first moment, but even so recently, we had there's an incident this week with a client that their MSP covered part of their endpoints. We covered another part, not exactly the way we like things to go, but when an incident happens, how do we respond, right? Like the tool is there. We both have the same tool. They've got the exact same agent that we have the exact same agent, but it's then how do we respond? So my team responded 5 o'clock in the morning, doing everything we can to make sure they're functional by the time business opens. But same tool, different organization, crickets for 4 hours. So we all have the same tool, but like, how do you as a person deal with the problem when it arises? And I think that's where it sets us apart, is like, you can't just rely on the tool. It's part of it, not to like make a shout out to Huntress, but like I will. Huntress has great tools, but they have the culture of the people. Like that's, I think, what we relate to so well, is that the culture of Huntress is very similar to the culture that we've created. Is like, you have a tool, but you also have people backing it up. And that's where I think that, just this last week was a prime example of that. It's who's backing up the tool and the policy.
No, I think that's a great point. And this is part of why I was excited to have you two, because when I even thought about this question and other questions, I never actually considered how, looking at it from a perspective of how two companies with the exact same tooling could actually have very different security outcomes just based off of the culture, right? Like, I know culture is important. That's why we're having the conversation, right? But I never looked at it from that perspective. So I think that's a really good point, and I'm gonna steal it. So so yeah. But moving on, I know both of you work in, highly regulated industries. I know that compliance is like the thing that's looming, the elephant in the room at times, right? Especially as it relates to like security awareness training, because I think so often than not, we think about culture and everybody thinks about security awareness training, and it's so much deeper than that. But how do you keep your teams and your clients from falling into, the kind of check the box mentality where they confuse compliance with actual security and actual culture of an organization, right? The resilience of that organization. I'll come to you this this time, Teresa.
I do a bit of in-person training as well. And I think this seems very basic, but I kind of like pump people up. I mean, pump up their ego. Like, you are true. And I say this in training, like, yes, you as an individual are the biggest risk to this practice, but we work a lot in healthcare. But however, you are also the greatest defense that this practice has, because again, I'm going to say the word people 1,000 times in this call, but that's truly like how I feel. Mostly, I think, because I am the non-technical staff, so I like to focus on the people. But I think it's super important to give them that confidence, to give them the confidence that they do matter, that everything that they do matters, and that they're not just one person, one vote, one click, that all of that comes together and they can be the greatest defense for the practice. So if you give them that confidence and put that faith in them, and then I think that they have a tendency to take it more seriously.
I love it. Ernesto, your thoughts. How do you keep your teams and your clients from falling into a check the box mentality where they confuse compliance with actual security?
I think the one of the key factors here is, just like Teresa stated, you're educating the users, and I try to stress this as a team effort. It's a collaborative effort. Okay, from the users, from management, for us, we're all in it together. And a lot of times with the live security awareness training, when I show the metrics, let's say, for example, if they're doing cybersecurity awareness training, and users are not completing the sessions, they're failing for the phishing, but not doing the remediation classes and all that kind of stuff. When you put those metrics up there, and I tell them, okay, so think of it this way. So let's say you have a breach. Your cyber insurance company knows that you are doing cybersecurity awareness training, and they ask you for your latest metrics. And if I present them these scores right now as it is, do you think will they approve your claim? They may deny it because basically no one's completing it. So it's a pump up, and I don't want to say a scare tactic, but I just want to bring them to reality. It says, this is what it is here, and this is what the bad actors are doing out there. So when you're educating them and they realize that it's not just business will be impacted, they could personally be impacted financially, especially with some of the stuff that's been going on, then they take a sort of effort and says, okay, you know what? Cybersecurity is not just businesses, it's personal too. And then some of the stuff that I have at home could be compromised. So I think it's a two-way, like bad cop, good cop method, but it works, because people start, once you realize it's everyone's responsibility, then there's the buy-in.
Yeah, and it's I think the two-way piece is one, obviously we talk a lot in the industry around kind of co-managed environments, but I view it so much deeper than that. It's to your point, it's around like, hey, this is our as consultants, as MSPs, as MSSPs, as IT professionals. It's our responsibility, but I can't stop everything as me as a CISO, me as a security leader, whatever the case may be. There's an old quote, and I'm going to paraphrase. I should have wrote it down from Robert Gates that I used recently when he was talking to, at that time, President Obama, and he was saying, the one thing I can guarantee you, Mr. President, is that somewhere somebody in the federal government is screwing up. Right. And so it's one of those of like, I can build out the greatest tools there are. I can build out, I didn't get a chance to read all of the question or the comment yet around RBAC, but I can build out all the RBAC. I can build out all of these things, but humans are going to human, right? They're going to find ways to do things the way that they want to sometimes. Going back into one of those points you made there is kind of focused on like the translating. You talked about, Ernesto, some of the talking with and guiding some of your clients into this. How do you go about, these decision makers aren't always technical, right? Like they're not always people that understand security. They understand it's important because of the news. But how do you go about like that conversation of translating that risk into language for non-technical decision makers? What are some of your kind of keys to success there?
I mean, the key success is the financial impact. They understand money, right? They understand the bottom line and everything else. They know what it takes to run the company, correct? So when you point it, like you do a business impact analysis or something, okay, let's walk through what would it take or what would it cost the company if example A happens. When you're talking to the executives or the managing partners, they start seeing those dollars. I say, okay, let's say you're down for 3 hours. Okay, how much loss of revenue you're doing for the attorneys billed per hour, all the attorneys in the firm, the paralegals, the secretaries, and all that kind of stuff. And then that's not even the recovery cost of the technology, whatever the case, whatever it is, right? What if you have to restore from backup? Now we're talking about 24, 48, what are you willing to risk? What's your acceptance level for being down and not be able to work, right? So when you look at that point, again, business impact analysis, then that's when it starts bringing up, says, oh, okay, so what can I do to ensure they were up and running as best as possible without killing their purse? But so that's the way I look at it and approach it, is you have to use business terms and how it impacts the business itself. And that's how you lead the conversation.
And Teresa, I'll pose the same kind of question your way. Where have you found success around kind of translating and maybe even the minutia of how you like to translate some of that risk for non-technical decision makers?
Yeah. I think dollars. I mean, honestly, it's always going to come down to dollars. I think one of the most impactful reports that we go over with our client is it's the value we can scan their computer and say, here's all this data that you have, and we can put a dollar value on it. So if just your single computer, something happened, what is the value of that data on there? And we can show them a black and white number. And that always hits home a little bit more than something that they can't grasp and understand. I think it's just, it's a matter of talking to the CEO differently than you talk to the CTO. You need to find what hits home for them, like what hurts them the most. And then that's what you have to talk about. I mean, a big part of, I think I saw a comment pop up on this about trust.
Yes,
If there's ever, someone from marketing in the room, the CMOs there, or anyone, or even the owner of the company, and I talk about, you've owned this business for 25 years. Imagine what this would do to your reputation. You can pay money and you can pay fines and you can write checks all day, but it took you 25 years to have this many people trust you, and that can be gone in an instant, especially with regulations like HIPAA, where you have to notify the community and you have to notify your patients. The reputation is almost, I don't want to say it's more valuable, but it's a lot harder to get back than it is to make money again. So I just think speaking to them in a way that what hurts them, not hurts them because I don't like to think of it that way, but yeah, what speaks to them, the CFO, what speaks to him, what speaks to this person. I mean, down to business development, who's going to go with your company if you have this massive breach? So just finding what matters to them.
Yeah, I think you both hit the nail on the head from how I've approached it in the past, right? I created this terrible slide that I shared recently, which was taking the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And like that's the stuff that we as security practitioners think about and run through our head all the time. But translating that to what, and I was like, what are the three that they care about the most? And I had to come up with three because it was a triangle. So I threw risk as one of the cornerstones, but it was revenue and reputation, right? To y'all's point, right? Those are the areas. I am curious, and not to drill too far down, and maybe you can be like, I don't know. That's fine. That's an answer to this question too. But what are some of the ways specifically for those non-technical folks? I try to use analogies a lot. I try to use some of that stuff. Are there any other like actual minutia techniques that you guys have found success with? Because now I'm just curious.
Techniques and ones that, having the discussion with the business stakeholders. I mean, you can have an analogy as, for example, you build a house, but you don't put up windows and doors. Does that make any sense? No, it doesn't, because you're going to put the windows, you can put the doors. Now, let's say you take this step further and you put an alarm system in the house, but you don't turn on your alarm system. What's the alarm system doing for you? It's not doing anything. So it's not providing that protection that you need. So that's just a really simplistic way I've seen it, I've seen it discussed before in the past. But it works pretty well, because people are like, no, I wouldn't not put a door on front of my house, because then you're letting all the animals and insects and anybody else to come into your house. So when you look at that, protecting your business information, and go back to your reputation and trust, those are key driving factors.
Teresa, anything you've got that has worked for you?
It's interesting because mine is similar, but it's much more Disney, I guess, in terms of, I always say, like, you build a castle and you put a moat around the castle, but then you leave your drawbridge down. Well, what was the point? Why'd you build a moat if your drawbridge is down? So they're almost the exact same thing. I don't know why the castle is in the house, but
Well, this is way better than the Texan and me having an analogy about I lock my door, but I also have other things to help me. Like it's way better than that analogy, sure. But yeah, no, I appreciate it. So we've talked about, kind of how to translate some of that and maybe impact culture externally for our clients. But I also, as a former CISO of an MSP, I understand that like sometimes that stuff doesn't always work, right? And we get into this fun topic, which is, sometimes we all know that there are those clients who push back on security recommendations. They may not do it overtly, right? It may be like this, I'm going to grind you down and just push this off and push this off and push this off until you hopefully forget about it. And, the pushback is it's too expensive, too disruptive. We've never had a problem, whatever the case may be. How do you lead that conversation to kind of impact that culture a little bit better? And how do you look at like drawing a line for your partners and your clients? I'll start with you, Teresa.
I think it's, again, I mentioned that I work a lot in healthcare, and I think it's about first, I think you have to understand their business. So understand the position they're working in. So if it's a surgeon or, it's a very busy practice, and you can understand what it's like to work in their shoes and be constantly having to rush. And if you can be compassionate to that and what their needs are, and so that when you're making your suggestions, I think if they believe that you understand their needs and their business, when you make a suggestion, I do feel like they accept it a bit more. So when I say, I understand, and I'm going to think of, I understand that you're in surgery and you don't want your screen to lock 15 minutes in while your hands are in a patient. I can appreciate that. Can we compromise and put something on there. Because a lot they, I don't want it to ever lock. Well, we can't really do that per HIPAA. So per the, the laws that are out there. So trying to find, understand their business, be compassionate about it, but truly be compassionate about it. And if you personally aren't able to be compassionate about it, recognize that and have someone else talk to them that can be, and be compassionate to that struggle that they have, and find a way that you can somehow meet in the middle, because there are ways. And I do find a lot of times, being like from the non-technical side and working with a very technical person, I'm very like gray, let's build a castle, right? Like that. I mean, I go back to that, very like in that area. Whereas like, I think as an engineer, a lot of times people are very black and white. It's this way or this way. It doesn't always have to be like that. There are compromises. There truly are compromises, even in security. And if you can be willing to listen to your client versus my way is the highway, I think that they will tend to trust you more, so that when you draw a hard line, they're more likely to listen to it. When it comes to like MFA or backups, EDR, like even ITDR at this point, like I think I hate to be touchy-feely, but it's about that relationship first and how they feel, and making it that they can trust that you have their best interest for the business and their security, not just the security. You have to think about both.
Love it. Love it. Ernesto, same question back over to you around like, hey, how do you go about, with the folks that may be thinking it's too expensive, too disruptive, we've never had a problem, these types of things. How do you lead that conversation? At what point do you kind of draw a line or look at that?
Good. This is a good question, because one of the things I think Teresa hit it perfectly is trust, the relationship. You have to build that relationship, right? Because once you understand that once that client knows you're not a vendor, but a partner, you're in a long-term journey with them, right? That's how you build trust. And then what you do with some clients, you have to have a roadmap. So, I remember dealing with security for many, many years. I ran into security engineers like it was a hard line. You got to do all this, and then all of a sudden now no one can work. That doesn't work. That doesn't solve anything. It puts a negative taste on the attorney's mouth for this one firm I'm thinking of surrounding security. So when you have that negative experience, they're going to look at it negatively. They're never going to want to do anything. So the key thing is showing them a roadmap and how over time we're going to introduce these product lines that's going to overall reduce their risk, right? Because one of the things now, like today, is like they'll say, okay, I don't want this. I'll say, well, and I'll ask them, okay, if you get compromised today, how are you going to recover? What would you do? So those are the kind of, I call them ask questions. Those are thought questions, because sometimes you don't think about those things. We're the professionals, we're the advisors. We need to bring that into the forefront to the conversation. But if there's a point where you get a client that doesn't want to do anything, doesn't want to do email security, doesn't want to do EDR on the desktop, doesn't want to do MDR or ITDR, any of that kind of stuff, there has to be a point where as an MSP or MSSP, you have your standard. Your clients should meet that standard, but there's a point where the client does not want to meet your standards. Now they become a liability. And that's the decision you have to make. The decision has to be made. It says, okay, is either I'm going to still try to approach this client to meet our standard, or we're going to have to sever ties because now this client's a liability on our side.
Yeah, and it's a tough one, right? Like I've had some of those conversations, right? They're never fun, because I also just look at it, back to Teresa's point too, right? Around like meeting them where they're at, and also empathy, right? Of understanding like, hey, where is it? Where's the rub? How do I kind of meet you where you're at to find the compromise that works for both of us? But when that breaks down, the trust breaks down, when everything else breaks down, there are kind of those conversations that sometimes are just needed.
Bryson, can I add one more thing?
Yeah, go for it.
The one thing I forgot to mention is, and this is what's worked very well for us, is when we approach a security, solution for the client, and they say they don't want it, we have them sign a waiver. Mm-hmm. And in that waiver form, we have all these things that say, okay, we offer this, it will provide this type of level of protection, everything else, but you denied it, so we're removing responsibility. And then when they read it, you get 75% of the clients end up buying the solution. Mm-hmm. And you got 25% will sign that waiver and say, okay, it's their responsibility moving forward. So that's one of the things you can't do as well, is having the client sign a waiver, and you'd be surprised the type of reaction you get from clients.
I
I
actually
like
completely agree with that. When you put something in front of them and you shift it and say, okay, you're saying no, this is what can happen. It suddenly they start to think about it again and think, well, wait a minute now, maybe I should probably reconsider. And Ernesto's right. I think that a waiver is, and that's actually something that we've recently introduced, not only just to like a full compliance package, but if there's like bits and pieces that maybe they just don't want to do that are negotiable, but we still, okay, that's fine. We're okay with that. We want to fit your needs and your budget, but this is what we're responsible for now, and this is what you are responsible for now. And it's very black and white. So
I I like it for I like that idea from the tactic of let me disclaimer, I'm not an attorney, seek attorney advice, yada 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 yada. Bryson's not an attorney. However, I've been given the advice before, which is that, these waivers aren't always worth what, the ink that's on them. I've been told this by attorneys before, but I love the idea of using it as a way of waking them up to, hey, this is what's at stake here, and then it being put in front of them as like, hey, it's a wake-up call. So I do like it from that perspective for sure.
I think for me, it's the awareness that it brings more
Yep.
than anything else. Because you're
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
It's ink on paper, but
Yep.
it's also scary ink on paper. So
Yeah, sure.
the
So
reality.
I want to bring it back over to business incentives a little bit. We've touched on some great stuff that I wasn't necessarily anticipating us going down that rabbit hole, but it's been great. So thank you both for the insights there. But I want to touch on kind of the incentive structure on cyber resilient culture of organizations, right? So sometimes the client's own business incentives work against security. They're rewarded for speed, cutting costs, not slowing things down. Security oftentimes can feel like friction, right, against all of those things. How do you help a client see that security isn't working against their business goals, but is actually protecting the things that make those goals possible? That switch in the mindset, how do you kind of frame that? How do you talk about that? And whoever would like to jump in first, I'll leave this one to dealer's choice.
I'll go ahead and lead. So, I
Okay.
mean, it's something similar to what Teresa said earlier. When you do the assessment and you identify those sensitive information on the network, right? That's part of the example you're going to show. Okay, there's sensitive information out there on the computer system, the network shares, and everything else in the cloud, wherever the case may be. That holds a lot of value, right? And then from my experience in being in the financial industry and the legal industry, there's always has to be a balance of productivity, because the key thing, you don't want to hinder productivity, but at the same time, you want to show them how you can protect their data. I mean, even it's just simple as putting ethical walls in there in your DMS system or any legal applications, any applications out there. So, and someone mentioned, role-based access, all that kind of stuff. Those are all a combination, a solution that people should only have access to what their title or their job function is, right? If you lead with that direction, you'll be able to manipulate the security solutions behind the scenes, because it's not a direct, if you learn how to deploy security solutions, that's not a direct impact to the user, it goes a long way and it's easier to be digestible by the client.
Teresa, same kind of question to you. How do you help a client see that security isn't working against their business goals? It's not actually the friction they think, but it's actually being an enablement to those goals.
Yeah, I think this is a tough one because, risk isn't visible. You don't see what's not in front of you or what's lurking. I guess I should say lurking behind you. I think you have to, in a way, show them. I think you need to be able to show them the risk and use examples. People love stories. Like they really want to hear real life examples and real stories. And I think if you can take a business owner and, I keep going back to the compliance piece with HIPAA because of our clients, I'm sure people have heard of the HIPAA wall of shame. It's the listing of everyone that's been under investigation. And, I say, you can look at other people in your area and, you have to think about, do you know this person? Do you know what they went through? And a lot of times people do. And you just have to remind them, like, this friend of yours that had this incident, how did that impact their business? Well, now here I can show you a plan that we can roll out in phases that you're comfortable with. So let's start with EDR, or let's start with vulnerability management. Let's start somewhere. And then you can see that your business is going to continue to operate as usual. And then when you start to feel like maybe you're getting slowed down in some way, let's talk again, reevaluate what we're doing. Or if you're not noticing a difference, now let's add another layer. So I just think putting something in front of them that's relevant, something that they can relate to, because a lot of times like, oh, it's like I have 10 employees, like nothing's going to happen. Let me show you a list of people with 10 employees that something has happened and how did they recover from it. So just being relevant, realistic, and I think phases, especially if someone's really adverse to change, like let's just do a couple of things and then that's good, then we'll do a couple more things and then we can work through it from there. So being flexible.
No, I really appreciate that thought around flexibility, and sometimes the flexibility comes back around and in the form of incidents and like these conversations. I think there was a question earlier from Rob around like in the chat talking about how do you convey not if but when while emphasizing the security efforts, helping him minimize the impact or risk, revenue, reputation. And I think it touches in on a different question also, but I pose it just because I'm going to ask the other question, but I think it touches on it. So if it doesn't, Rob, let me know. But when a client does have an incident, maybe because there was a compromise, or maybe a compromise of like our standards, or maybe it was because like, hey, they decided to do something that we recommended against.
Mhm.
How do you use that moment to shift the culture going forward without it feeling like a I told you so moment, but
Mhm.
like a hey, let's I think it was Rahm Emanuel many years ago with the quote of never let a good crisis go to waste. So how do you kind of think about that and kind of really try to drive long-term cultural impact of the organization? Teresa, I'll start with you.
I am a big believer in not talking at someone, but talking with them. And I think that that's something that's really important to remember in this situation is that you need to keep, this is after an incident, something like that happens. This is not the time to prove that you were right. I mean, they already know that you were right, and nobody wants to talk about it. And if you spend that initial conversation just proving that you were right, proving that you're smarter than them, they're going to be completely resistant to anything that you have to say. You have to have like an honest conversation with them about what went wrong. You don't want them, I personally, you don't want someone to feel attacked or embarrassed. Like they're already internally probably dreading talking to you. I mean, for a fact, if you told somebody to do something and something happened because of it and they didn't do it, you are the last person they want to speak to. Because and the worst thing that you can do is behave in that way. So I think it all comes back to your attitude. And again, it comes down to the things that tools and policy can't control. It's you and how you treat your client and how you respond to them. And just being appreciative. Thank you for, letting me know that this happened. Now we need to work through a plan. Can we talk about how we got here? I just think you don't ever go back to that conversation. Of course, now if it turns into like a legal argument or something like that, you're going to have to go back on that. But if you're just having a discussion, they know they're at fault. You just kind of, this is not the time to make your point. Be compassionate, be a good partner, and that's how you build that culture of trust. And then they're going to trust you next time you recommend saying something.
And and that's where attorneys' jobs are, as if it gets to
Yeah,
that
that's not my
legal,
job.
right? Like they can say,
Yes.
Teresa told you so, right?
Yeah,
So
that's not for me to say.
yeah. Ernesto, going back to the question and really diving in here on like how do you use that moment to shift the culture going forward, right? Teresa talked about, it's not now's not the time for the I told you so's. I couldn't agree more. How do you kind of use that as a way to shift the culture moving forward?
So it's funny that this question came up because we kind of had a similar incident about 5 years ago. Um, and the way I look at it is, to me, you have to be very professional, right? You have to be, because now the client's in crisis mode, right? So you're more like the psychiatrist calming the patient down, right? So if you look at it in that sense, it's like, okay, what I need to do to get you, you start, your wheels start turning. Says, okay, So you become the advisor for that client. So let's say if they have to initiate cyber insurance, you're going to be the liaison before the client on the technical side and as well with the forensic folks and with the breach attorney. So you're that glue that sticks everything together during the incident, the crisis, and that's how you lead by example, right? Because you're not telling, well, if you would have put this firewall in here, you wouldn't have this problem. No, that doesn't work, right? What you do is, just like Teresa said, you have to, you have to have that professional attitude, decorum, to be able to handle the crisis in the first place, be able to pull in the right resources to get this client back up and running, and work with the insurance company. So it's not how do I say this? It's the client already know that if they would have, because a lot of times what happens with these type of incidents, especially when they invoke cyber insurance companies will investigate and say, hey, the breach attorney, would you have this? Well, no, it was recommended, but they decided. So they're going to learn from the breach attorney, so you don't really have to say anything. And the client, there will be appreciative of what you have done to get them back up and running. And they're going to realize that, yeah, they should start listening to you, because all I tell clients across the board, once you're connected to the internet, you're a potential victim. I don't care how big or small you are. It doesn't really matter. Once you're on the internet, you're a potential victim, and that's it.
For sure. I couldn't agree more. And, there's like probably 10 more questions along this that I want to get to, but I just looked up at the clock, saw where we're at on it. So I'm gonna wrap up on kind of this question. You feel free to use it as words of wisdom as it relates to culture, but also just in general. I think it's valuable when we have amazing partners such as both of you, to be able to lean on some of your expertise and things that you've learned along the way, not just on the technical side here, but whichever route you want to go, which is, I'll start with you, Ernesto, and then we'll go over to Teresa. If you could go back and give yourself, one or two pieces of advice before you started this journey on the consulting space, in the security realm, all of this, what would that be?
I would say learn from your peers, because as originally as an engineer, technician, or developer, you want to do everything yourself. You want to be the one that solves the problem. You hold on to that incident or ticket for a very long time, and now the responsiveness to the client is not there, right? Because if you're no longer meeting SLAs. Be able to reach out and make it as a team effort, reach out to your peers and stuff like that. Leverage your partners as well, because what I've realized over the years, there's some really good partners out there. They are top notch at what they do. Leverage it, because you don't have to know everything. You have to learn to lead and corral really smart people around you in order to address certain type of issues and incident. And that's what we do at Frontline. We have SMEs everywhere between network, firewalls, and everything else, infrastructure. So in an incident, I can leverage several team members from several teams to deal with that one incident, so we're not doing everything ourselves.
Teresa, the floor is yours. The piece of advice from before you started this journey. What would you tell yourself? What's the thing that maybe some other partners that are listening right now, some other people in the consulting space, what would be that piece of advice?
I think knowing your own personal strengths and weaknesses and just accepting them. Same with your team, but personally, I couldn't configure a firewall if my life depended on it. It would never happen. But I'm also really good in incident response, and I'm really good at making sure that our clients are happy, and they're not happy. They're not happy in that time, but they're comfortable. They feel safe, I guess I want to say, and they feel like that you actually care and you're going to get them through this. And that's something you can't teach. I'll never do a firewall, but I'll make sure that our clients feel really comfortable all the time. But also trusting your team and trusting in the people that you put them in the right places. Same thing with what I'm just saying with myself. Some people aren't good at some things and they're really good at others, and you can't expect the same people to do all the same stuff all the time. Know your team, find their strengths, build up their strengths, give them confidence, and empower them to do their own jobs instead of trying to do it all. Because I think, coming into SciTech when it was really in its infancy, I wanted to hold on to everything all the time. And that you can't grow that way. You have to be able to really trust and empower your team. And if you can show them that example, I think that they in turn can give that back. So practice what you preach.
100%.
I agree 100%.
Teresa, Ernesto, sincerely, on behalf of everyone that's tuned in and learned from your expertise, thank you for the willingness to jump on and share your experience and perspectives on all of this stuff. There's so many other things I want to get to with both of you, and at some point I will. But again, thank you all.
Thank you.
There will be a survey around some of the conversation here. Obviously, next month we'll have another fireside with some other partners and some other folks with different perspectives and expertise. But thank you all for joining in. I will try to take a look at the questions. If there's any questions that I can help answer, we'll try to reach out. But thank you all for joining in for this month's fireside chat. Have
Thanks,
a good
guys.
rest of your day.